Hello and welcome to the Marketing Times Analytics Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Sofronas, and today we're on with Justin Rashidi. Justin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Justin. I'm the co-founder of SeedX, a data enablement company. And yeah, excited to be here, Alex, and talk about business and the company and all sorts of stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, so tell us about SeedX.
Yeah, I think people think that we're a marketing company. We're not really like a marketing company in some capacity. We view ourselves much closer to a business development company, and where we specifically serve in marketing, sales, and then data or tech enablement. And so what that means is businesses have problems, lots of them. And so if you have a problem in one of those areas, you come to us and we help you basically like work to solve core issues. So instead of working at like just I would say a service line issue, like usually most people are coming to us at a core business issue. And then we're talking about what activities that they need to do to actually solve that problem.
Gotcha. So what are some of the more common problems that you face or that businesses face when they come to you?
The most common one I would say is that people just don't understand their KPIs or the data isn't there to allow them to understand their KPIs. So most people come to us because they want to grow. Like they want to grow more, they want to invest more into whatever channels or things. And usually there's a core problem where people aren't really understanding what's driving true business growth. And it could be whether they're not tracking properly, the KPIs are a mess, or like they're hidden in like spreadsheets or something like this, right? And so usually this is the number one problem, whether you're a B2B company or a consumer company. This is usually the first problem that we're working on. And then from there, it usually is like, how do we take this and then move into actually like acquiring new customers, driving more return customer growth, improving sales processes, etc.
Gotcha. Okay. So definitely a lot of conversion rate optimization there, probably.
Yeah, conversion rate, but I think it's conversion rate. Like when people think about CR, usually it's like website testing. It's much more about driving like business metrics. So whether that's the amount of book calls or the profit margins of certain product lines, it's much closer about optimizing like at that core business level and not necessarily optimizing. Yes, you optimize for a click or something like this, the cost per click or whatever, but it's usually with the idea that we are ultimately driving this business result.
Gotcha. So do you also run analyses to understand the relationship between those upper funnel conversion points and the actual business results that the client is looking for?
Yeah, and we do a lot. It depends on the size of the company. So depending on the size of the company, we are basically helping them track like what is actually driving growth. And depending on the size, like we use different types of tools to help us do that. But yes, if whether it's top of funnel, middle funnel, or even bottom of funnel, are you like over attributing bottom of funnel because like you can more easily track that click? Where if you're like truly at a view based top of the funnel, these are like much harder to track. And so what types of activities do you do to actually track these top of the funnel events?
And what kinds of technologies would you integrate to help with that tracking?
Yeah, it depends. So like every great question, it depends. It depends on the company. And usually, so if you're a B2B, like the main one is, do you have a CRM? Does your CRM enable these tracking? So the first level is like click-based tracking, right? So a lot of people aren't even actually doing like click-based tracking. And I don't know if I should go crazy talking about like B2B and consumer, but there's quite differences in these. But so on the B2B side, yeah, it's much more about the first level is, are you leveraging your CRM to get like true like click-based tracking into your CRM so you can actually optimize like the campaigns or activities that you're doing. On the consumer side, it's similar, but usually it's actually easier because the consumer like purchase cycle is a lot smaller than like a B2B cycle, where most are like it could be 1 day, 7 day, 28 days. Like that's a lot different than like a 6 month sales process. So usually with this one, we're optimizing around like core business metrics more. And then in both cases, like when you're actually at top of the funnel, you actually have to do data analysis or measurement is what it's called. And so like you run these like holdout tests and these different types of one's called the causal impact and the other one's called the holdout. Those are like the two standard ones that we're running normally. And these tests like help determine like how do true like top of funnel activities actually drive bottom line metrics.
Gotcha. Tell us more about causal impact analysis.
Yeah, so causal impact analysis is basically it's a Bayesian formula. So what it means is it takes a set of prior data, right? So it takes historical data and then it projects out like what it thinks would have been like that next number in the times table or whatever. And you take that as, okay, this is our baseline, and then introduce a new activity. And then you measure like whether there was lift from the baseline. So like what your expected value is, what your projected value is versus your actual value.
Is that like an MTA analysis?
Multi-touch attribution? No, it can be. So it's really cool. Like causal impact is really interesting because you can use it on click-based attribution, but you can use it for actually like anything. You can use it for measuring new customer growth, return customer growth, whether this campaign had more performance on all sorts of like activities on the website, engaged sessions, how long someone's watching a video. You could do it for like all sorts of stuff. Most of the time you're doing it for like revenue. You're projecting out your revenue. In software companies, though, they'll do it where it's like they'll actually do this. It's like a nice test for software companies because say you introduce a new feature into your product and you want to understand like how that impacted like signups or something like this, right? Instead of doing a true A/B test, right? It's really nice. You can just roll out that feature and then you can see whether that created change and whether that was significant with that lift. And you could do it for SEO actually. Like you could change a title tag on SEO and then see like then because like with SEO it's a really interesting one because you can't actually A/B test very easily. And so if you wanted to test title tags, you could change the title tag and then measure if there was a change from what was the expected value.
Interesting. So you're using Bayesian probability. Tell us more about the actual mechanics. Like how are you running this analysis?
Yeah, there's a lot of packages. So Google actually has like a causal impact and it's in R or Python. Like we do a lot more in Python. So we run it in Python and you basically pull in the data. You like the big thing is actually making sure the test is set up correctly, which is the prior data accurate? Do we believe it's accurate? So like cleaning like for like pre-test analysis, making sure that like it makes sense, like the data that you're feeding into the model. Actually like running the model like is the easiest part. The most important part is actually like the pre-test and then the post-test. So like on the pre-test, or do we actually believe that all this data is correct and we can validate assumptions off of it? And then on the post-test, you also want to understand were there anomalies that happened that could have caused this result without it. And so those are actually like the more important parts. The actual part of running the actual thing is just a computer. It's a package that you run and then you customize as needed. That's actually the easy part.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that I haven't heard about that. And so I'll definitely be doing some research. I think that's really valuable. When do you use the causal impact analysis when you're deciding between different types of analysis to optimize based on?
Yeah, so like there's three standards I would say like of testing, right? So the first standard is like random controlled trials, which is like very actually hard to do like in any type of business sense, but like in the medical world, this is what they do where they're doing like random control studies and like really understanding that actually created that impact. In the business world, like you can't really do that. So the true like gold standard in the business world is generally considered like a holdout test, like an A/B test between two regions that are very similar. The problem with that is you have to think about from like a business perspective, is it going to take a bunch of work to set this up? Is the risk of setting up the test actually like harder, or like the risk is too high to actually set up the test that you don't even know if you want the result, right? And if you did run that test, you might not even be sure if you could get a good result out of it. So there's a lot of like input to go into setting up this test correctly. And so you have to like basically weigh like the business pros and cons, whether you want to do that. But with that one, people say this is really a really strong test because like you generally have a higher degree of confidence that like what's called like differences of what you're measuring with this is accurate, right? There's less fluctuations and you're just comparing these two groups. And if there was like some type of anomaly that happened, right, it would happen ideally across both groups equally. And so you can continue marketing efforts and all these different things. Causal impact is really nice because you can just plug it in and you don't have to make any changes, right? You're gonna say, okay, we're gonna measure. So we had a company once come to us, like they didn't have time to install like a CRO website thing. They're like, we want to make these changes on the website, but we don't know how it's gonna impact it. Can you help us? And I was like, yeah, actually, like we can actually do a causal impact study where you guys make that change and then we'll measure add to cart rates, initiate checkouts, revenue per session, and all these things. And we didn't need them to install software and do this split test and figure out all these things. It was like, just make that change. And then in 30 days, we'll tell you like whether we believe this is an impactful change or not.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. Do you ever do analyses and how does that factor into this?
Yeah, MMMs. We do them, but the idea is that you want to like triangulate between these different types of things, which is usually you run like an MMM less in a year, and it's supposed to give you direction. And usually you want to use like an M report to actually help you develop testing ideas. So like maybe you think that Google is actually like the MMM is showing, hey, Google actually we believe is like underreporting its value. Like we believe them showing it 3 times the value actually because of something that's happening. What you usually take from like these M reports is tests that you want to run. And then usually you'll feed back the test into the M to help like optimize the entire cycle. So I don't know how to answer your question. Yes, we do have MMMs, but usually it's with the purpose of getting insight to develop tests, to validate a test.
So yeah, I love that. And I think it's really important to flesh this out because there's so many different statistical techniques that a business can run to provide a data-driven direction on what to be testing. Can you give us an example of how an analysis can trigger a testing idea?
Yeah, the most impactful ones are when you have a lack of clarity around the true attribution of a channel. And NMs can like really help with, again, top of funnel events as well, right? So if you are actually like running a bunch of television ads, again, there's one testing, like I was just talking about geo holdouts or causal testing, you can do that. But ideally, if you're feeding them correctly, the data for these campaigns, right, it should give you an idea of a baseline measurement that it outputs, right? The problem with this is like there's tons of different apps. So there's like Facebook Robin, there's Google Meridian, there's I forgot like there's a third one that like people really love too that I can't remember the name now. And they all have some slight nuances in them too. But usually again, you take that data, right? You understand what these MMMs, because it's one point in time, right? The problem with MMM is like you feed in all the data, right? And then after that one point in time, like you only have the direction for, okay, I ran this today, and now you could actually say like that is no longer valid after that day. So you use that to basically gather ideas and insights into the business. And yeah, the specific ones, like the one that like I was just referencing is we were working with a consumer company. We believe based off of everything that like we stack, Google was like actually like underperforming its value, which is rare. Usually over reports its value. But in this case, it was underreporting. And yeah, like the very first thing is we actually did an report for them. And then off of that, we actually moved into the testing where we're like, okay, let's actually validate this test or of what we're seeing with like that report. And that one just came up recently, which is why it's like very top of my mind.
Gotcha. And so would a next action be to invest, like to follow the and invest more and then recheck using another M model? Or would you use a different model to check the effectiveness of that optimization based on the?
You can run that. And there's that just have like different types of, so like Google's Meridian, it uses a time series analysis in it. And then in that one, you can pull different types of keyword searches. So they allow you to pull in the keyword searches. It's like a harder to run model where Facebook Robin uses, I think it's ridge regression. And so it's like more of a linear regression model. And ideally, they should give you similar results, right? Because the point of them isn't to tell you precision, it's to tell you directionality, right? And so you don't necessarily always have to validate them. And usually if you have them set up, you can run them all at the same time. Like it takes a little bit of time for them to run, but you could run like Robin and it's like PyMC, I think is the last one. And you can run them all at the same time and see how the results are. But ideally, the directionality of all the reports should be pretty similar.
Gotcha. And which do you recommend running all three, or do you have a specific preference?
I think I like Google Meridian. I like Google Meridian, and then the other one, like PyMC, is a Bayesian model as too. So I like time series analysis more on a lot of the business activities because time is seasonality and things are like very important in businesses. So I like that it takes those into account. But usually run the one that's easiest to run. I think people maybe overcomplicate it a little bit. It's like at the end of the day, like you're trying to use it to get insights, right? You're not trying to do it. You shouldn't use M to be like, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen into the future. So I think a lot of people use it as like a forecasting method. And it's usually not best for a forecasting method, although like it will give you a projected forecast. It's best for like insights. And then you can have other tools for forecasting. But yeah, so run the ones that you think they're all good. They're all good. Like they just have pros and cons.
Yeah. Speaking of forecasting, what's your approach when I'm assuming you're making changes to a business. Forecasting is probably part of that equation of here's what we can expect. What's your approach?
We just run different types of algorithms. So these ones I can't remember, AIMER, and then there's different, you can run like a standard regression model, AIMER, which I can't remember the exact details, but there's different types of pretty standard forecasting models. We actually, again, like to just run all the forecasting models at the exact same time. And then you can see which ones are doing better, which one's hitting like the closer things, because usually you want to build like each business, depending on it, like a forecast model one specific forecast model might actually work better for a business. And it's very strange. It's sometimes hard to pinpoint. It could be like how their ads on Meta actually resonate and drive results versus this other business has this, right? So there's certain models like where you can incorporate the ad spend impressions and like these things, and that actually generates a better impression, like a better forecast report for a business. And so usually, definitely on forecasting, we just run them all. And then you just pick which one. You can pick like which one is like hitting and slowly start optimizing it.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
Hopefully. I don't know if it makes sense.
No, it does. I think that you're describing a level of data-driven optimization that I haven't even been exposed to yet. And I think that's really impressive. So I'm really just here to learn from you. What are some of the other types of analysis that you employ that you find particularly valuable for businesses?
The simplest one, like the one that most people know, I think, is like multi-touch attribution. Right? Yeah, multi-touch attribution and MMMs and then measurement, like they all go together, right? So like usually you don't need to run an M like if you're a smaller company, right? And you don't need to do measurement if you're not like spending a bunch of money on a bunch of different platforms, right? Generally, we are recommending people to like start with like really small things, right? So like the smallest one is, hey, are you even tracking a touch-based attribution? And I think the right way is not that we're doing so much, more so what is the size of your company? What kind of activities are you doing? Like you don't need to go bring out like a bazooka to shoot a bird or something like this, right? It doesn't make any sense. Hey, just start like with this really small thing. That's probably going to give you like enough results, grow your company like 2 or 3 times more, and then do the next thing, right? And then you'll have money to invest in it. It'll make more sense, this report. Like if you're like sub 10 million, like you don't really need to be doing like a report, be like crazy actually.
For spend in marketing?
No, even like revenue. Yeah, like usually you need to be doing, it depends on how much you're spending. And this gets into like cost analysis and cost benefits, which is you want to be driving a certain percentage increase in efficiency for it to make sense to do these things. And so maybe a few $1 million a year in ad spend, if you can start to save 10 to 20%, right? Like usually you can save around 10 to 20% by really understanding where efficiency is happening and then cutting wasted efficiency. So it makes a lot more sense. Like, yeah, if you're spending 10 million in ad spend, it's like usually a no-brainer, right? But a lot of companies say they're at 10 million in revenue. They might only be spending, like say 20% of their revenue on ads for consumer companies. So they're spending 2 million a year. It might not make sense. It's like if you're doing 30 million and you're spending like 5 to 6, then it probably starts to make sense. And then if you're spending 100 million or something like this, like of course it makes sense. You should be doing these activities.
Yeah. How do you approach the amount of spend that should be allocated to marketing?
It depends on your growth goals. It depends on what you want to accomplish in the organization. I don't like to set it, like it depends on the margins of your product and all sorts of like different business factors. And then it also depends on whether you have like financing and you're trying to actually grow quickly, or if you're trying to cash flow the business more and you want to balance growth with like cash flow, right? All of these numbers basically would give you like an idea of, hey, you probably want to be spending like a MER of 15% versus a MER of this percent versus a MER of this percent, right? A lot of companies aim for 20. That could be like too like little for some companies, and it could be like way too much for other companies. So like a baseline metric usually isn't, in my experience, like it's not a very good tool actually to use. Usually, at least for consumer companies where MER and stuff like comes up like much more. Usually it's like you want to understand like what is the cost of goods, the cost of delivery, and then factor in, okay, most ad spend is going to new customer acquisition. Usually only a small percent is going to return customers. So how much can you spend? Like how much are you fine spending to acquire that new customer? that usually actually starts to turn into the percent that you're going to look at for like customer acquisition. But based on like your margin and stuff, right? One company might be, oh, like they could spend 40%, right? And they could actually be running their business 40% of the revenue is going to ad spend. And if your company has a smaller margin, right, or a lower repeat purchase rate, it would make no sense. Like you would definitely not want to do that. And so like we see companies where they're literally, we see companies from 10% to 40%. And each of those companies is happy with that number based off of like the outcome that they believe it's going to cause for the business.
Got it. So it really comes down to understanding the cost per conversions and reasoning from there.
And if we're specifically getting into like new customers, and again, it gets on the size of the company and like how large your current customer base is, but generally most ad spend is going to expand into new audiences, new segments, et cetera. So you can generally assume a lot of your ad spend is going to hit new customers over return customers. And I think people think about this. This is a little bit different because a lot of people are obsessed about ROA, but ROA could look really high, but actually you're advertising it to someone who would have purchased anyways. The platforms attribute it, right? They shouldn't have attributed it because it didn't actually drive that result. You can only spend so much money to your return customer base before like it actually saturates. And so unless you're Apple or like some mega company, right? All the companies that like we're working with, we're not working with Apple, maybe one day, hopefully, right? All of their ad spend is going to new customer acquisition. And so then you can basically model all of your business metrics and your business growth off of like your cost to acquire this new customer and then your return purchase rate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Do you do LTV modeling ever?
Oh yeah, of course. Like LTV modeling is like one of the more important aspects for like actually setting targets for acquisition. Because if you are a consumer product good, like you might not be able to be profitable on that first purchase, right? Because the margins are too small, the average order value is too small, right? And so you can work to get the average order value up or increase your margins and these things. But a lot of the time, like these companies, the margin's too small. And you really have to like really understand like the repeat purchase rate. What is the LTV of this like customer, right? Like when does that LTV like manifest? Because once you start to recommend companies to lose money on the first purchase, you need to be pretty confident like when that money is going to return. And so like part of the, like whenever we start with a brand, a consumer brand, like that is like a core focus of understanding. Okay, it's even like beyond that too, because you want to understand what products are actually driving the highest LTV too. Because if you're running campaigns to like your worst products, right? And you're using like this blended like lifetime value, like you're actually also will die before that LTV will never come. And you actually see this quite a bit with product SKUs where like a certain type of product SKU, like if they use this one and they buy this product first, the LTV of it is 3 times higher than like your worst product, but you're probably advertising them the same.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And do you break out the LTV into like add-ons as well? That if we add X and Y or like a support plan or something, then the LTV or survivability increases?
Changes in it. We haven't actually done that. It's a good question, right? If I introduce this different type of service, did it increase LTV? This one's like a hard, I'd have to think of, that's a really good question, actually. I'm thinking in my head right now, I'm like, how would we, now I'm like, now we would, on this one, we would want to use like a causal impact study, right? Because you'd want to understand, this is one where you couldn't A/B test, right? So what I'm thinking about in my head is this problem hasn't really come up to us before because usually, I don't know why it's, no one's ever brought it up before, but like the way that I think about this would be like, yeah, say we're introducing more customer support or a support plan that like really helps. What's cool about like what I was saying with causal impact is you could never run this like in an A/B test environment, right? You have to do it like all or nothing. And so you could actually do it. The way that we would do it would be we would use this, we would pick that point in time. This was before and this was after, and then we could actually help measure that lift. It's never come up though. Yeah, I don't know. Have you heard of someone like thinking about that before?
Yeah, it did come up at my last company, just looking at different profiles of buyers and their associated LTVs. And those profiles of buyers had different package profiles so that they would purchase. There was some combination of looking at the interaction between the different product features, but I think there is I don't hear a lot about that sort of stuff, and I'm thinking about that now. I think that is a really interesting place to look when you're making those LTV recommendations, because generally, and I've been on a lot of like LTVs type of teams, And typically it's hard to get really actionable insights out of LTVs. Like you get these very broad numbers and it can be hard to say, okay, what decision do I make now based on that? It can help impact spend for sure and give you baselines. But I think in general, LTV is one of the less utilized and granular sets of analytics at businesses. Would you agree?
Utilize, I think, I definitely agree that LTV might be a harder to measure. I really am going to think about this question more. It might be a harder to measure what action do I take to like influence LTV to increase it, right? It's a lot easier to understand LTV, which is these are the behaviors that we already see, right? And these behaviors like drive like more of that. So do more of that. From an action standpoint, like you're saying, like what if we introduce 24-hour support? Would that increase LTV? The only like complication here from like like I was saying, you can do the causal impact and it would actually be helpful. The only like caveat that you'd have to be aware of is if you believe that there was another activity that actually increased during that time. Like maybe you have, oh, this is the bee's knees ad coming out. It's super viral. Everyone likes it. What actually happens, like this can actually increase LTV too, right? So the only problem with this test is you have to have some degree of certainty that there was no other inflating variables that like created it. But you could ideally test these things. And probably, I've never worked directly with an LTV team actually. So maybe that's why I don't hear about it as much. Is that a common team to have in an organization?
Yeah, for big business. I worked at DirecTV and IBM prior to my current business.
Oh, okay.
So they had specialists for every single type of analysis. And yeah, it would basically be just breaking down the LTV projections into different customer buying cohorts. They bought X, Y, and Z versus A, B, and C. And these are the different LTVs. You can extrapolate that like adding this feature increases the LTV.
And their product lines are huge. Like you're talking about all sorts of product lines across all sorts of different business segments. So it makes sense that, an IBM has this team. But you could introduce these features though. Like you could introduce these tests. Like there's no reason that you can't introduce these tests or suggest these tests. The only problem that like an LTV team would have that would be a little bit harder is that there's so many variables that maybe are outside of your control and how to measure like that change. And so working with a good team, and that's why I was telling you about post-analysis, like the post-analysis is actually like the more important aspect, because if you're making recommendations off of a test that wasn't actually correct, it's really bad. Like it's better to not suggest anything than to suggest something that like, oh, actually there was this other variable and we're going to make a huge like business change and we're not actually confident that's right. And so I imagine, and this is the problem. So we generally work with companies like, we'll work like 10 million to like $1 billion in revenue, more or less, like maybe a few billion. Some maybe are a little bit larger. Yeah, so IBM, they're doing a lot. We're like medium mid-market. And then that's like enterprise, true enterprise, where, like you're saying, they have teams for every single thing. And that's probably maybe why I've never seen that problem, is that we haven't. We're growing up market, maybe one day.
That's still $1 billion plus is really impressive. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was referring to before, is like with LTVs, it's a very soft metric. And you're looking at it so broadly, almost like the way MMM and MTA are like soft metrics. Like they're really hard to get a lot of consensus on in order to make big changes, because there's so many nuances in the way that they're calculated. And then most people who are ingesting those insights aren't understanding the nuances of how the models are developed. So it's very easy to like throw questions in there that sort of undermine the analysis, valid or not. It's just easy to throw like a lot of questions into it that make people not trust it as much. So I think like I would group LTV within that group of like analyses that are hard to make really big business decisions based on, just because they lack some of the specificity and explainability. Compared to, that's probably why like first touch or like touch-based attribution is so commonly implemented, because it's so easy to understand. And that's ultimately a part of the equation for what gets used in a business.
Yeah, again, so my two favorite ones are actually measurement, and I like click-based attribution, but it doesn't paint the whole picture, what you're saying with top of funnel things. And then I like measurement. Like I actually think that measurement is the one I'm not like a super lover. I'm not like, oh yeah, because everyone could interpret it differently. And that's what I was telling you. Yeah, the reports are nice, but then what is the point? Are you supposed to make huge business decisions off of this one report? Which would be crazy, right? It's like you should actually validate like your assumptions, and then you can execute, like you can invest more in that decision once you've actually validated that assumption. And that's why, yeah, click-based is nice because it's a good starting point, like I was saying. And then like MMMs, like, yeah, maybe this is like blasphemy. I'm like, yeah, they're nice, but like you're saying, don't make business decisions off of them. Yeah, like the right process usually is though you validate your assumptions and then you make better business decisions.
So let's say a business is coming to you and they're saying, Justin, how should we spend our budget for next quarter? What analysis would you, or combination of analyses would you run to make that recommendation?
The same thing. So in this case, like we probably would actually run an M, right? But not with the idea that like we're going to deliver that as like the end all be all, right? It's okay. We like usually what we're taking into what's nice about our team is so we have a measurement team, like a data science team, but we also have the people who are running the ads, right? And so usually we'll do an analysis like how is television doing? How is YouTube doing? Like how is linear TV doing, or connected TV? How is Meta doing? How is Google doing? All these different placements. And if you have a team, they'll analyze those teams whether they believe there's performance drop in the channels, right? You can run it. And then usually we have like previous reports and things that we've learned like along the way. And then usually what we're doing is not telling people like exactly how they should be spending right away. Usually we're telling them the test that they like we believe that these things are probably true and you might be overspending here and underspending here, right? Can we validate these things in the next 2 months? And then you can actually go and execute with more degree of certainty that you're actually going to hit the forecast. I think this mythical forecast, right? It only works if like the underlying variables are actually hit.
Yeah.
And so usually that's the process where it's like we're doing like a high level overview. We're understanding what your core business metrics are. We're figuring out like what tests to run. We validate the test, and then we'll give recommendations on like where to expand or where to cut ad spend. And this is what I'm saying. A lot of people actually want to cut ad spend, or reallocate, right? Because if it's budgets are always being squeezed, so you're like, how do I get what's really like great is if we can say someone 10% of ad spend that wasn't actually driving out an effect, and even just reallocate it to something that had a 30% more like increase in efficiency that you couldn't totally tell. That difference is like actually like a big difference. And usually what's really cool is not necessarily how to spend more, but also like how to just take your ad spend and just drive more efficiency out of it is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. This has been such an information-packed conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm just curious, like looking into the future, do you think there will be any new forms of analysis introduced into marketing in, let's say, 5, 10, even longer time horizon?
New? I'm sure. There, of course, like there's no way that it, I don't know. Maybe I'll say the opposite. I would maybe wager that it's not going to change because the types of tests that we have now are more explainable tests. And humans will not make decisions unless it's explainable. And so my concern would be like we have modifications of this current test that help the explainability, but I don't know if we have, because you can run like a machine learning test and people hate them because it just outputs a number and it's like a black box. There's no explainability in it. And so I would say that based off of seeing that, like people trying that and all the executive teams hating it, that it's not going to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And that's the difference between the academic perspective on testing and stats and the real world, is that you need to bring everybody along when it comes to running stats. And so that does limit the types of techniques that can be used.
I always tell people that I think the metrics are the easy part and the people are the hard part, because we spend a lot more time on alignment than we do on because people want to ask questions about it, right? And so if you can't answer their questions and explain it, you're not going to get buy-in and you can't make these things happen. And so like the people problem actually is like a more significant part of the job, in my opinion. Like the metrics they're the metrics, right? This happened. This is what we believe to be true. We try to validate in all these ways. And then now you have to convince 6 different people to get on board with this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, and I'd love to have a follow-up conversation in the future just because I think there's just an endless amount that we can unpack in this area. I want to thank you so much, Justin, for joining. And this has been a really great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for having me.
Awesome. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you soon.